to understand that decision clarity is applicable and transferable across sectors, right, across industries. The reason we focus on nonprofits and social impact for-profits is just that that's authentically who we are. We really want to help organizations do more good, like literally do the work that you're doing better. We came to this work as a result of years of seeing firsthand missions being impeded by a lack of transparency, inclusion, trust, and by an abundance of fear and biases in how we, or even if we, talk to each other, communicate, and confront conflicts. And part of that is we think about the reality of the world is we have our home lives, and often our home lives we're surrounded by people who look exactly like us, who talk like us, went to the same schools, live in the same neighborhoods, and then we go to work with this idea that that doesn't make a difference when we're working with people who are very different. It does make a difference, right? The reality is we do need ways in which we can better communicate with each other because we're all very different, and that takes some leadership skills, and that's part of what we're gonna train you on today. My personal experience is directly related to this. If I may be so bold, I'll say my own brilliance of being stifled because of other people's inability to think of a middle manager. Like I pretty much got stuck in that middle manager point. Their inability to think of me as a middle manager from the very communities that we were often serving, a degree from a small liberal arts college and state schools, let alone a woman of color and openly gay, right? There's no way that I could actually have the ability to make successful decisions. And that's this was my experience in both nonprofit and for-profit worlds. Decision clarity itself doesn't care what gender you identify as or what sex you are, right? It's cultural norms and society that cares and impacts how we think about decision-making and power. It's really important to know that no one has power implicitly. It's an applied way of operating. We want to remember that power is situational and it is strategic. It is contextual and it relies on the compliance and the influence of others. We all have our individual relationships to power that change and shift depending on our knowledge, our privilege, and lack thereof. When we speak about women in power, when we speak about women and power and decision making, we have to remember that women are not a monolith, right? I mentioned today, this is a very diverse room. So when we think about the sphere of women, we have different races, ethnicities, languages, aspirations, family histories, sexual orientation, geographical influence, gender representation, class, ability, interests, right? The list could go on and on. And within this diverse sphere, there's varied relationships and access to power. So it is an unequal system that we're talking about. So when I started thinking about, okay, how do I really be intentional about decision clarity and women and power and leadership, but what most of these come back to is the socialization of women, and that it creates a psychological barrier for women when we start to unpack these ideas about power and decision-making in our organizations, whether we lead them or not. And so, since all this remains true, what also stands true is the need for us to establish, reestablish, reimagine, and realign power and decision-making in our organizations. Right? And that's what Steve and I hope to do with you today. It's an understanding of power and decision-making that influences how we work together and our organizational cultures. We are talking about organizational change. And Steve, and though Steve hates, like we're not organizational change agents. We're not organizational development specialists, but at the core of this, when I mentioned in my welcome that it takes courage, we also are talking about behavior change, and we're talking about what Esther mentioned this morning around like making a commitment to change your hiring policies. That's behavior change, right? That is, it's not just a business thing. Like that, for someone who's really used to like we only hire from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, to change and say, you know what, there's a larger field out there. That takes a behavior change in how we act and how we think. And that's what we're talking about today. And so Steve and I believe that to help organizations get unstuck, or those of you who are baby organizations just getting started, to never get stuck in the first place, like you can save a lot of the finances that other people now are having to put toward it by establishing clear processes at the the forefront of your growth of your organization, it really is imperative to look at how power is wielded, how we wield it, how we shy away from it, how we, how we let it limit our thoughts on what what is possible for us to accomplish. And so to that end, the main thing that Steve and I do is that we focus on decisions.